slide. How to study. So now we're going to talk about how to study, study skills, test-taking strategies, and how to use that information not only within college but also in professional life beyond college. Lessons learned from 11 years of being a university student. So I myself was in your place as a student and I had no study skills. Hated high school, barely graduated, not because I couldn't but because I wouldn't. And didn't, and as I didn't perform and I didn't acquire skills I needed to acquire. Ran screaming from high school, thought I would never go back to school, didn't have any interest in it. Hated it. Didn't realize that college is radically different from high school. Went into music and construction. Construction paid the bills. Music did not and never would, because the kind of music I made was expressly non-commercial, and I succeeded. Unlike Pearl Jam, who tried to be non-commercial and became commercial, our music was not geared for the general listener, and I was never going to make money doing that, and I did not feel passion for construction. The construction trade has wonderful people in it. The people who taught me were artisans. They were masters of their trade, and I have every bit of respect for people to earn their living doing labor, skilled or otherwise. But it wasn't my calling, and I wasn't happy doing it. And so I didn't have an alternative, and I wound up more or less exhausted with my opportunities and convinced by my family that perhaps I should try community college. I thought, oh God, this is bad. I don't want to go to school, do I? And so my mom took me down and I had some encouragement, and there I was in my early mid-20s enrolling for my first community college classes. Not sure about this at all. Just knew I didn't want to do construction anymore for a living. And I got there and I went to the classes and I liked it. I enjoyed it. It was totally different. Nobody told me what to do or when to do it. I came to the classes because I wanted to come to the classes. I read the material because I wanted to read the material. I enjoyed the learning process, and I didn't mind the testing process because I knew the material, but I had to work really, really, really hard to know the material well enough to get the grades I wanted. By that time, I had already partied and been a mischievous, I won't say thug, but ne'er-do-well for sure. And I worked that out of my system, and there I was, old enough to know better, and if I'm going to take the time and spend the money, then I should do it well. And the A's were all I was after. So I had the benefit of some family support, but I had a wife and a kid, and then got another kid within a year of being in school. And I always worked. So I worked 20 to 30 hours a week, every week, and then sometimes took side jobs in construction. At the peak level when I was at UNC Charlotte, I took 24 semester hours, one semester. Don't recommend it. While working and raising kids, one of whom was an infant, the other one was a preteen at the time. I made straight A's. But that's not because I'm a genius. And it's not because I was manic. I'm not bipolar. Not that it would be a problem if I was. I'm not manic or hypomanic. I went without a lot of sleep. And I went without hanging out with the kids as much as I wanted to hang out with them, because to attain the grades I want to attain took me all night, a lot of nights. I had to work really, really hard to get to the level I wanted to perform at. And in so doing, I got the things I needed, but I didn't realize what that would do for me later. So I had this really high GPA, 3.925, and somebody in my senior year says, well, you could go to grad school with that. I didn't really know what that was. My dad had an advanced degree, my mom was an RN, and I didn't really know what they did. I rejected that middle class upbringing that I had been blessed with, and I didn't engage them in conversations about what that meant. So I didn't know what it meant to me. And I said, well, why would I do that? And they're like, more money and more freedom. Do what you want for a living. Get paid to do it. I'm like, that sounds good. So I applied to graduate school. Didn't get in the first time. That's where we'll talk about career planning now, is another seminar. Didn't know what I was doing. Wasn't planning a career. All I was planning was what not to do, not what I would do, which would have benefited me tremendously if I had been doing that, which is why I teach that seminar. But there I was, didn't get in the first time, got an $8 hour job with a BA, a BS, and an AA, and I could have made just as much working at Chick-fil-A, but I found a job that I loved. I was working with people who had severe mental health issues, and I found it to be fulfilling in a way that my previous jobs had never been fulfilling. And then I met a master's level therapist who coached me on how to apply to graduate schools appropriately and properly, and I did that, and I got in. And in the one I got in, I had checked off the box, would you like to be considered for scholarships or fellowships? I didn't even really know what fellowships meant. I just checked the boxes. Yeah, of course, who wouldn't want to be considered? I didn't really think anything about it. But my 3.925 undergraduate GPA then got me the Alumni Fellowship, which paid for a lot of my schooling in addition to the GA I was getting, the graduate assistantship. And then I got a Tarrant Scholarship named for a professor up at Appalachian State Psychology Department. And at one semester, I actually made a profit. Not in debt. All my tuition was paid, all my fees were paid, all my books were bought, and I had $400 left over. I made money because of my GPA in undergrad, and I didn't know that would happen. So I say, people don't realize what they may want way down the road, so that it's easy to kind of just blow off this moment you have here. But by taking care of your GPA and learning how to study well, it may pay you back in ways that you can't possibly foresee at this point. So taking care of it's important, and I learned how to do it much more efficiently by the end of 11 years. I don't want you to go through 11 years of trial and error trying to figure this out, so I figured it's incumbent upon me, being in the position I'm in now, to share it with people. We're going to talk about all of these factors: pre-class, preview, prepare, book, condense that sucker, in class, notes and location, post-class, review, distributed and massed practice, studying, time management, pre-test. Well, all of that is pre-test, right? But I mean like right before the test, 5 minutes before the test, hour before the test, during the test, test-taking strategies, and then post-test, after the test, what should you do? So we're going to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. I'm going to be mindful of your time and be done on time. Pre-class, preview, prepare, the book, condensing it. So what do I mean, previewing and prepare? I mean you have been given materials and direction prior to going to class about what will be covered in class. You're getting some notes probably from some professors. Back when I went to school, they didn't have that. There was no D2L, no Blackboard, no email. Email existed, but students weren't assigned email addresses. So you got the book and you went to class and that's all you had. But now you get a lot of access to a lot of material, and you can get more material off the internet fairly easily. So when you've got a syllabus, you want to read it and you want to know what you're going to cover, and you want to preview that material. And in doing so, you're preparing for the first class. Don't make the class the first time you heard that material, and we'll talk about why that is. So we're talking about assigned readings, chapters being covered, notes provided on websites. And you got to figure out what's important out of all of that. That's a lot of material, but not all of it's important. In fact, a lot of your book is bullshit. A lot of it is fluffy, non-necessary information to justify charging you a ridiculous amount of money for a product. It's a business. They're going to charge you a couple $100 for a book. How do you justify that? Well, it's going to be big and thick, full of full color glossy photos, but you don't necessarily need that information. You need to be able to detect important information within that. So if I'm looking, for example, at a personality book, textbook, to teach that subject, and most of them I'd seen up in today, and they probably changed the person from Madonna to Lady Gaga or somebody equivalent in the future, but they would have a giant photo of Madonna on stage acting all wild and crazy. And then they'd have a photo of her with a couple shopping bags and out of makeup with her kids in tow. Which one's the real Madonna? Would be the implication. But they might be talking about trait theory of personality, right? And they're both the same person. But I don't need a big color glossy photo of a star to get the gist of the information. What I need is to know what the gist of the information is. I need to know what the trait theory is. If it's the big 5-factor theory of personality, then I need to know openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I don't need this big, fluffy story. Well, that's what they put in there. Pedagogy, some of it's called. Some of it is useful. It directs your attention. What could be useful? Well, things that are highlighted for you by the book, the makers of the book. Chapter headings, subheadings, bolded text, italicized text, chapter review. Usually at the end there's a chapter review with a list of key terms which you should know cold. Not, God, what does that mean by the time you get to the end of the chapter? But you know it well enough that not only could you answer a question about it, you could teach it to somebody else. But you've got to be able to sort through that material. That becomes a skill that you develop with time. So how are you going to read? Most people think they're supposed to read entire paragraphs entire chapters. I got to read chapter 1. I got to read chapter 2. How many people, by show of hands up in here, have read 15, 20 pages and realize they don't remember any of it? That's normal human cognition. That's normal experience. You've just invested a lot of time and gotten virtually nothing out of it. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because you didn't have a strategy. I didn't have a strategy either. That's a very frustrating experience to put in that time you have so precious little of and then not get out a feeling at the end of it you really understand it or know the material. So I say read paragraph by paragraph, unit by unit. So if I'm talking about personality, the first whole paragraph may or may not have anything in there I need to know. It may say something like, people have been interested in personality since time immemorial. Great. Who cares? Doesn't matter. I get it. You're introducing the topic, a little fluff to get us going, but is there anything in that unit that I need to know? No. So I got nothing out of it. But the next technique, the next paragraph, I might see a bolded word or italicized word, or they might start talking about a concept that I'm unfamiliar with, and I go, what? That sounds important. So what I want to do is make a bullet in a spiral notebook on the side. People go, well, shouldn't you highlight? Well, no, you shouldn't highlight. And here's why you shouldn't highlight. Highlighting is a great speed reading technique, right? That's Evelyn Wood's speed reading technique. If you want to read fast, put your finger on the text and just go over it. Don't read it out loud in your head. Just scan it with your eyes as you go across it. If you do that, you'll be able to process information more quickly, but not deeply. So right before a meeting, if you hadn't read the memos that other people have sent around, that's the best thing you can do, is to go quickly through it because you'll have a gist of what's being said. However, you won't know it for a long time. If you think about that, if I read, I usually read by reading out loud in my head, yes? You read the words to yourself in your head. How to read. Do it paragraph by paragraph. Take notes on things that are obviously important. Do not highlight. That is a good speed reading technique, but you do not need a book full of uncritically highlighted material. That's how long it takes me to read that by myself, not saying it out loud. But if you take your finger and go across like this, your eyes can process that a lot more efficiently without reading it in your head, but not deeply. And you probably bought those used books that are all yellow, or all orange, or all green, or all blue, full of highlighted material. Do you think that they critically highlighted that material? No, they're just going along, right? There's a sentence or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. That's not helping. And if you did critically highlight the material, then if you have 50 pages worth of reading, then to review it, you would have to literally physically flip through 50 pages. But if you will take a spiral notebook and you read paragraph 1, anything in it? No. Paragraph 2? No. Paragraph 3? Yes. Bullet. Then if I have, let's say, 50 pages with 10 paragraphs each, maybe 6 of those paragraphs have something worth writing, right? Now I can break it down into a list of bullets in my words in ways to make sure I understand it, and now I'm done with that paragraph. I don't have to reread it because I have transcribed its essence into a spiral notebook. Some people are like, well, should I do note cards? Well, you could do note cards, but I don't recommend it primarily because it just takes more time. To do a note card, you have to do a physical note card. Then move a note card, do a note card, move a note card, do a note card. You don't have to do that in a spiral notebook. You just go down the sheet, flip it, go down the sheet. And God forbid you drop this pile of cards, right? Now it's all out of order. You drop a spiral notebook and you pick it up, it's in exactly the same order. So that's a benefit. Right? So that's why I say it, not because it's a bad idea to write down things in flashcard format, but it's a lot easier to go through that material if you have it in a spiral notebook. Your goal is to sort out unneeded material from critical and otherwise important material. That is a skill. That is learning how to go through and go, well, what is important here and what is unimportant? What I need is a succinct record of all important material. And that may start to come also from an interface with your lecturer, hopefully. Your lecturer is adding something besides just reading the book. If they're not, you might as well be taking it online, right? If it's just reading, you can do that yourself. Hopefully your lecturer is adding examples, explanations, taking questions, enhancing your knowledge. But in any event, you figure out what's worth knowing. You want a record of that. So you're going point by point, writing what's important from each paragraph in the spiral notebook. That gives you a condensed version that is much quicker to read, only covers important material so you can read it easily over and over again, which you should do. People are like, well, don't that take a lot of time? Yes, it does. But tell you what else takes a lot of time. Reading 20 pages and not remembering a thing in it. Because if you really want to know what was in it, you know what you have to do now. Reread it. So if you take the time on the front end, what you do is you process it once and you're done with that primary material because you've now transcribed it into this succinct thing and you don't waste time. So give yourself a break after completing a set number of paragraphs. So you might say to yourself, I'm going to read 10 paragraphs and then take a break. I'm not going to read a whole chapter because as you'll recognize, your attention will drift on and off. And sometimes you're paying attention and sometimes you're talking to people and you ain't even paying any attention at all. That's normal, right? But if you are taking yourself into a succinct way, paragraph by paragraph, you're not going to drift off. You're going to go, there's 10 paragraphs. Take a break. And by break, I mean stand up, stretch, maybe get something to drink real quick and get right back on it. Don't go do Facebook or whatever people is doing now. Don't get on the apps. Don't get on the Flappy Bird. Don't text people. Don't go watch TV. Don't go and fix a meal. Don't go talk to the roommate or the family because all of that is more fun than studying. And that's what you'll wind up doing because it's more rewarding to do that. It's easy to get distracted, hard to pay attention. So you have to learn to train your attention because training your attention is something you can do. It's something you have to learn to do and each individual needs to do it a little differently. So now we've got that succinct record. What about in class? Now you come into class. Well, don't bring my notes. Read my notes before you come because it's a primer. As I said, when I start talking about what I've given you notes on, that shouldn't be the first time you're hearing that material. That should be at a minimum the second time you've heard a material where reading the material ahead of time gave you a foundation so that what you hear in lecture ought to make a lot of sense. It ought to really align with what you've read. And if it doesn't, that should prompt a question for you, right? Well, I read this, and what you're saying is that, and I'm not sure I understand. Could you clarify or give me another example? And not everybody's comfortable doing that in class, but I was that person who would do that. And if you're having a question about what's being said in lecture, and you are the one that asked the question, what I found is a lot of times after class people come up and go, thank you for asking that question. I had no idea what we were talking about. I said, me too. That's why I asked the question. But if you're not comfortable asking the question and you don't have somebody else leading that, then talk to your professor after class. Their job is to help you. My job is to help you. I love my job. I love doing what I do. I don't get paid a dime to do these seminars. I do them because I love what I do and I want to pass this information on to other people, right? Not everybody is that responsive. And keep in mind that don't let a bad instructor limit your ability to learn. Worst instructor I ever had, UNC Charlotte, chemistry. The guy seemed to take pleasure in flunking people and making stuff really, really hard. His lectures were ridiculous in that they told you nothing that wasn't in the book. I just read the book over and over again. I just processed information over and over again. 2 people out of 170 or so made an A in that class. I was one of them. And I didn't understand hardly anything when I left. In my mind, I said, what an awesome opportunity. It's a chemistry for non-majors. I thought this was going to be great, and he made it awful. But I didn't let him steal the knowledge from me because I had the ability to get the knowledge from myself. It would have been lovely if he made that fun and enhanced that experience instead of, causing it to be less fun. But take you a spiral notebook to each class. Don't bring my notes. You read my notes. If you bring my notes, what people tend to do is they just make little stars on stuff, or they write a little blurb in the margin. They're not really processing what I'm saying, and so you want to be challenged to process what the person's saying. Bring you a couple pens or pencils because you know how the Murphy's Law works, right? You only bring one, it's going to break or run out of lead or run out of ink or whatever. So bring you a couple pencils, bring you a spiral notebook. Now you got 2 spiral notebooks. One's for the book reading and the lecture material online, and the other one's for the actual lecture in class. Take notes as close to verbatim as possible. Make a shorthand to do it easier. Verbatim just means word for word. Well, you can't write every word I say or anybody says, so you start learning to make your own little shorthand. In psychology, we got that little symbol there, that psi symbol. I didn't even know literally until my senior year what that meant. I was like, man, they love that symbol up in here. That's psychology. You can just write that, and that means psychology. So if I wanted to write out industrial organizational psychology longhand, that would take a long time. But if I just go I-O psychology, I just wrote it in no time. They said behavior all the time. So for me, in my notes, it was B-E-H, behavior. If you're in a class and they're talking all about Freud and they keep every time they say Freud, big F means Freud. Nobody else has to know what that means but you. And be careful with your notes, because that is your gold. Don't give that away to nobody. I once had this, people come to me at these, this is before I started wearing my tie. You know how they come up after tests and they like compare, like, what'd you get on the test? I got this. What'd you get on the test? They say, what'd you get on the test? I said, I got a 92. They're like, well, how'd you get a 92? I'm like, thanks. What kind of judgment was that? How did I get a 92? I studied is how I got a 92. They're like, well, I studied. I'm like, why? What'd you get? And they say, oh, I got 85 or 83 or whatever it was. I'm like, well, how long did you study? And they go, 3 or 4 hours, man. I'm like, oh, okay. And usually they drop it at that, but sometimes they go, well, why? How long did you study? I'd say 15 hours. That would be not uncommon. I studied 2 hours today before class, in between classes, about 30 minutes right up to class. And last night I studied about 5 hours. The night before I studied 2. 2 days before that I studied for 2 or 3 hours. And I've been at every single class and read everything that I was told to read. Now that's hard to do. But by God, you'll get an A. And I'm looking at them going, man, it only took you 3 hours to get an 85. Look how much more effort I put into it to only get 8 or 9 points higher than you. But that 8 or 9 points higher translated eventually into scholarships and things that I didn't even know it would mean later, right? So it wasn't that I'm a better person, because I'm not a better person than anybody, but that extra work allowed me to get a higher grade, and I just wasn't doing it efficiently. And so you start getting a reputation for doing well. People will then want to see your notes when they miss class, right? So they knew I must be doing something. And people are like, can I see your notes? I'm like, okay, sure. And one girl, she said, can I borrow your notes over the weekend? You know, tests on Wednesday. I'll be back at class on Monday. I'll bring them back. And I'm like, I don't know. She seemed like a nice kid. She was always in class. And I'm like, all right. Be here on Monday because I got to study for the test. She didn't come back. She didn't come back with my notes. Left me hanging. I never loaned my notes out again. People want to borrow my notes. I say, here's what we do. After class, we go to the library. You pop into quarters. You may Xerox my notes. But if you don't know my shorthand, that's not my problem, right? I got there. I took as many notes as I could, close to verbatim as possible. People are like, I can't really follow you. I can do all of it. That's right. You can't. But if you're trying to write the whole time, then you're paying attention. Because usually, by now, most people have drifted off a couple times, right? You kind of fade it out for a minute and start thinking about something else or somebody else, or just kind of started a conversation on the side or checked your email or something. And for that period of time, you were gone, right? But if you're writing all the time and you realize you're not writing, it's quick cue to go, oh man, I got to pay attention again. You can't get it all, nor should you write everything down. Sometimes you got the professor talking about their dog or their cat or what happened to them over the weekend. Don't write that down. But if it's getting to the material you think might be on the test, write as much as you can, because it keeps you focused. And now you have 2 records. And actually, you got 3 records. You've got the material that they provided you with notes online, if they did that. You've got the book material, and now you've got the lecture material. And all of that should go together such that it makes total sense to you. Sit near the front of the class, if not in the very front row. People are like, I ain't no teacher's pet, and neither am I. But every single class I was in, that was my chair right there. Front row on the side. Because it makes it easier to see what's up here. It makes it easier to hear what's up here. And it's harder to fall asleep up here. Social pressure is that you keep your eyes open. Now, people fall asleep in my lectures. I don't wake them up. I'm not rude to them. I'm like, hey, sleeping in my class. If you need to sleep, sleep. Even if it's in the front row. I don't care. I think you made the effort to be here. That's a good start, right? But the fact is it's harder to fall out up here. Back there, man, they don't even know you're here. gets warm, you just ate, you're all sleep deprived, right? We know this. And you're going to fall out. Plus, way back there, there's nothing wrong with you as people, right? There's a correlation with grades of people who are up here. For this reason, their attention is easier maintained. Between y'all and here is a bunch of distraction, a sea of distraction. You got people that are, texting. You got people who are typing. You've got people who are hot. You checking them out, right? And hot guys and hot girls you're looking at. You do that after class, right? Girls do that too. But they're smoother about it, right? Girls like this. She got it. Locked in. But it doesn't mean she's not thinking about it, right? So now she's distracted. The guys are like, right? They're just not subtle. Guys and girls are distracted equally by attractive people, right? But what else have you got? People coughing, people crinkling papers. You've got all this mess, stimuli between you and what you came to get, which was the information coming from the person talking. Not that I'm a great person, I've just got the information you need, right? It's the test you're after. Attention varies for everybody. You have to make yourself pay attention to all of the class and get right back to attending if you've drifted off, and if you're taking notes, you'll notice that. Making yourself pay attention. Attention is on a normal distribution like any kind of human attribute you might measure. Some people are really, really good at it, but not very many of them. Some people are really, really bad at it, not very many of them. About 5%. That would be ADHD, diagnosable, right? Most people are in the middle, around the mean, a little bit better, a little bit worse. And the people who have the hard time with attention ADHD, people don't understand that. Like, well, you can play video games for hours. How come you can do that? Because that's intrinsically rewarding to pay attention to. All of us can pay attention to stuff we're interested in. The challenge is paying attention to stuff you're not particularly interested in. That's hard to do for most people and almost impossible for some people, right? And taking medication might be warranted for some people, but you can train yourself at any level to be attending better in any situation. In fact, that's one of the ways we know if you've diagnosed ADHD properly. If somebody takes a stimulant medication and they actually increase their attention, that's not what happens when most people take stimulants. When you take cocaine, it doesn't make you attend more to something. It scatters people's thoughts. If people have a paradoxical effect with a stimulant medication, that's probably ADHD, because most people don't take stimulants and get more concentration, they get less, all right? But even people with ADHD, medicated or not medicated, can learn to apply techniques to their own life to maximize the attention they can bring to bear on any given situation by doing things that are not a trick, it's just learning what to do. So doing this helps. But I used to have this one teacher, his name was Floyd Domer, and it was a graduate class in psychopharmacology. I wound up auditing it. Stuff was over my head, but it was beautiful. When Floyd spoke, it was amazing. He's a research pharmacologist. I filled up 3 spiral notebooks with stuff that came out of that man's mouth. Usually when I got a class notebook, it would be 1 at most at the end of the semester. He didn't have a PowerPoint. He didn't have anything. He just came in and talked, and he was organized, and he knew what he was talking about. And some of it was over my head, but I just took down as much as I could. But then I'd go home to read the book, and that was not exciting. And because I was sleep deprived, go to school, do your job, come home, hang out with the kids. What are you going to do to work? After the kids go to bed. So here it is, 11, 12 o'clock at night, reading this boring material. I'd fall asleep. But I need to read the material. So what I do, I figured out a way to make myself pay attention. I put the textbook on the counter of the kitchen, and I read standing up. Literally, read standing up. Can't read standing up and fall asleep, and if you do, you need to be asleep. Right? If you can stay awake on your feet, you need to go to sleep. You might need a nap. But that's what it took to make me pay attention. And I got this is on the internet, and if you're watching this currently on the internet, you can thumbs down it if you'd like, because I've had 27-something thousand views on the first edition and got like 10 thumbs down. Thumbs down for free information? Seriously? Boo! Free information. Boo! And I think what they really got was the experience of they wanted to watch the easy way to do the good grades. It's not easy to get the good grades. It takes work, but if you start tweaking your own strategies, you actually get better and better, meaning you become better at attending and concentrating so you don't waste time. So the time that you do spend is maximized in its efficiency. Boo me if you wish. but do or do not. There is no try, right? That's what Yoda says. Y'all know Yoda? Wise old Yoda. Now here's what it is. You took notes on the book. You took notes on the class. Post-class. After you leave the class, if you can do it within 12 hours, just reread over that stuff. Now, even if you are scanning it, that's better than not doing anything, right? Read the notes you took from class every time, because forgetting is extensive and it happens fast. And it happens so fast it's a little stunning. We'll look at a chart on the next slide. Read the notes from previous classes and the previous readings, because just taking that time to scan over that stuff again is reinforcing the knowledge. Remember, you took all that time to put it in there. If I took 50 pages and it took me 3.5, 4, 5 hours to condense that into a spiral notebook, and now I've got 5 pages of bullets, I might be able to actually process that 4 times, maybe 3 times in an hour, right? So I took going from 5 hours to 1 hour doing it 4 times. And if I do that, if I'll just go over it one time, every time I get a chance, it's going to reinforce and solidify it. Now, you would selectively highlight your notes as you read them over and over again. Because now the more you read them, the more familiar they come, and you can start highlighting key words that now you're doing that speed reading, but you're actually reactivating those concepts and you're thinking about them. You can go to memory seminars and pay thousands of dollars to improve your memory. But all they're doing is giving you techniques, tricks. They're not tricks. To come up with the trick, you have to use the information more, right? You're working with the information to come up with the little tool or device, the mnemonic or whatever it is. By using the information more, you're going to remember it more. That's it. It's not a mystery. People think, oh, I'll learn how to remember like nobody's business. No, probably not. You'll be like all the rest of us humans with normal memory. It's not that great. If you know anything about eyewitness testimony, you find out that we can create some pretty inaccurate memories and have a deep conviction that they're true when they're not. We have memories that play tricks on us. The faintest ink is better than the best memory. Taking notes, you got the best record of what was said or what was read. And if you have that, you can do it again and again. The more you use it, the less you lose it. Working with information more is the key. That's it. How to do it efficiently is the key too. You don't want to spend a ton of time like I spent a ton of time and lose a ton of time with the people you love or getting sleep or having a social life or whatever it is you want to do if you can do it more efficiently. So you got this Ebbinghaus curve, right? You've heard of the learning curve? That's your forgetting curve. Ebbinghaus was one of the first researchers to systematically study memory, and he came up with nonsense syllables because he wanted to study some kind of unit of language and see how much he could remember. So he came up with nonsense syllables so that it wouldn't have any inherent meaning. So like TEV, T-E-V, doesn't mean anything. Well, if you'd use vet might mean something to somebody who was in the military or who was a veterinarian or had a cat or a dog, you see what I'm saying? So he wanted to take meaning out of it and just see how much he could remember from neutral material. And so he would vary the length of the list, he'd vary the amount of time he would study the list, and he would vary the amount of time between studying and recalling the list, and then he would simply see how much he got right. And what he found has been borne out over time. So single subject design self-study is not a great research method, as I hope you would be well aware. But he was so methodical about it that he's actually been borne out with further research. So what he found was if he was studying for whatever duration he gave himself, and he went right to recalling right after that, he could remember quite a bit of it. But if he waited as little as 20 minutes, 40% of it's gone. If he waited as little as an hour, over half of it's gone. Right? 24 hours, now you're at 60% loss. Whatever you happen to know about 2 days later, you're likely to know a month later. That's the forgetting curve. That's what happens to people. It doesn't happen to you and me in normal classroom or work situations because we're not learning nonsense syllables. We've had some experience with the material before. The language you know. The language you're hearing, you remember some of it. You may have had some background in it. You might have taken a class in chemistry. You might have taken a class in psychology or art history in high school, and you have some kind of background so that you are not seeing it for the first time. But I would tell you that you will have this effect if you're not careful. So I was a graduate assistant, teaching assistant at Virginia Tech for Scott Geller, and his class had 1,200 people in it. They had 2 days they met, but they would then come all do a common test, and people would, after the test, be surprised by their score being as low as it was, most of them being freshmen. And they're like, I don't get it. I studied this. And I would ask them very sincerely, so did you read the book? They're like, yeah, I read it. I'm like, when did you read it? And they're like, last night. I'm like, is that the first time you read it? They're like, yeah. But I read it. I read the whole thing, man. And they really expected that to be there the next day. But it wasn't. And that stunned them. They weren't flunking, but they were getting low C's and D's because they thought they'd put into work to really understand it. And at the college level, you really have to understand it at a higher level than the high school level. Usually, high school's definitions, right? Matching, fill in the blank. At the college level, you're talking about applying the information, working with it with examples, understanding it at a deeper level. And that's just not going to be there in that short of a time. Now, the studying they did would have been cramming. There's not a thing that's wrong with that. As we'll see, it's better than not studying at all. But it's not sufficient to get the grade they were looking for, so they needed to change up their study skills. So how much time should you devote to this? Well, know that the university, all of them, figure you do spending 3 hours outside of class for every hour you spend inside of class. That's why it's full-time student status and you get money for it if you're taking out loans or getting scholarships, right? Because they expect you to be treating it like a job. Now, if you're taking 12 hours, that's 48 hours total, right? 12 hours in class a week, and then you've got another 3 hours per after week, 48 hours total, not lunch, not hanging out, not talking, 48 hours working. Now, nobody does that. It's a little crazy if you think about it, but think about it hypothetically. If you did, if you literally did that, 12 hours a week on each of 4 classes, what kind of grades would you get? You'd probably make A's, or something might be amiss. Could be a learning disability, or it could be a shitty teacher who can't create a good test, right? But if you know the material, you should be able to ace any test. If you spent that much time with the material, you should know it well. But that's not realistic, so you have to think for yourself. How much time do I need to spend? Well, it ain't 48 hours, but it's not 0 either. And it's somewhere in between, and people differ. Some people are able to gather stuff more quickly than others, not me. It takes me a long time to read stuff, so I got to figure in some hours per class every week and dedicate sufficient time to really study it and make sure I'm focusing on it. So hypothetically, if class is 4 hours a day, and it's usually not for most people, some people only go to class 2 days a week. It's a busy day, but you know, if you got 4 hours a day of class and school's a full-time job, why not add another hour, 2 hours a day? Right? Still not even 8 hours. And you could do it on the weekends. People are like, man, it's Saturday. I'm like, I know, great time to study. Right? Throw in an hour on it, and then you got the rest of the day for yourself to do whatever you want to do. Hang out with the kids. Maybe have to work that other job. I had to work jobs. I understand that people got obligations. But if you look at even studying 15 minutes a day for 4 classes over 7 days a week, now you're studying an extra 7 hours that you may not have been devoting on a regular basis. And that is distributed practice. Studying on a regular basis is distributed practice. It's distributed studying, right? Find a place that's free from distraction and use it consistently. It may not be your place. It may not be your dorm room. It may not be your house. If you got kids screaming and carrying on, my kids go to bed, then I could study, right? But then what I did when I was at school, if I wasn't working my job at school or having to go to another job after or beforehand, I would find time in between classes and go to the library and set up in a little nook, and I'd read stuff and reread stuff there. So you can find the time if you make the time. And you've got to be sure that you're able to focus. A lot of people are like, I like music on when I study. Well, I love music. I don't have it on when I'm trying to study because I've got a brain that's trying to make sense of input, right? That stimulus is coming in. If I listen to music, I don't have lyrics. Because if I have lyrics, as much as I think I'm paying attention to this, there's part of my brain that's registering in my temporal lobe and distributing across my brain that's listening to the music, making sense of the lyrics, or confusing the lyrics while I'm trying to focus on here. People think, oh, I can do multitasking, and most people can't do multitasking. Maybe on that normal distribution, 5% are good at doing multiple things simultaneously. But most people aren't good at it. They trick themselves into thinking they're good at it, and then they think they can do a bunch of different things at one time. But what they do is they're dividing their attention and doing each thing a little bit less well. Right? I am a good rapid task switcher, not a multitasker. I can't do this and this and this simultaneously well, but I can do this and switch to this and then switch to this and focus on each of those sequentially. So realizing that you've got limitations, you've really got to find out how to focus. And there are some people that are a little different. Again, ADHD seems to be an unusual situation where more stimuli in the environment might help for some people. Not usually. And because distraction is high for those persons anyway, I wouldn't recommend studying at the coffee house or where there's a lot of noise, and certainly where there's conflict or anything like that. It's distracting. When a test comes up, increase the amount you study daily, and the night, morning, before the test, study a lot more. However much it is, 5 to 10 hours, I would have studied at least 5 hours a night before a test if it was a big test. If it was a quiz, not so much. But if it was like a big test, better believe I'm going to find 5 hours and cram it in. And people are like, cramming's bad. No, it's not. It's not bad. It's bad if it's the only thing you do. But even if it's the only thing you do, it's better than doing nothing. All right? You're still working with material some, and if you're only going to do it once, right before the test is the best time to do it. Right? Because you're more likely to remember it, but you see the forgetting curve, you're not going to remember a lot. But if you've been studying along the whole time, distributed practice, then when you cram, you're not cramming new material, you're reviewing. You're reviewing and reviewing. And by being able to do that, you're setting yourself up for a win. And so when I find myself out of college, it turns out I'm not out of tests. To become a licensed clinical psychologist requires more tests. It requires a national licensure exam. It requires an oral exam with 3 examiners in Tennessee at the time I got my license. And what I found is they needed me to know a lot of material. And on that oral exam, it was about ethics codes and about laws and all kinds of things related to practice. Well, I'm an ethical practitioner within the law. I've been trained, but you have to know all these details that you normally wouldn't be aware of or need to be aware of for esoteric situations, and you need to know it cold to do well on the test. So what did I do? I took a bunch of material and I boiled it down to about 25 pages, spiral notebook. They were packed pages of bulleted information in language that I understand. And then I could read those 25 pages in about a half an hour. I got faster the more I did it. So now I can do the whole thing twice in an hour. Do it again. Do it again. Start highlighting, getting little bullets inside of bullets. And I could even get faster. Could read it up to 3 times in an hour. And then it was in Chattanooga. So there I am reading it over and over again, working with the information over and over again. Repetition works, repetition works, repetition works. You get where I'm coming from. Repetition works. I read it into an MP3 player, and on the drive to Chattanooga from Johnson City, I listened to myself read it to myself. And when I walked into this thing that is a career maker or breaker, right? I walk in prepared, ready to go. Test anxiety is not a problem for me because I know how to manage that kind of a thing. But that's where it comes from. People start worrying about the outcome. That's what the previous seminar was all about. But there I go into this room. 3 people I've never met before. One of them takes the lead. They're all licensed psychologists and says, essentially, we're going to ask you randomly questions off of this list that nobody's seen. Secure list of questions. Are you ready? And I say, absolutely, I'm ready. Let's do it. I'm really ready. I mean, I'm seriously ready. Let's go. I'm almost going to enjoy this because I know it that well. Not because I'm a genius, but because what? Repetitive, repetitive, repetitive. The first question goes by. I think it was the second or third question. That's the nature of memory. I don't even remember the question itself. But I remember what happened. The fellow asked me a question, and I nailed it to the wall so hard, so fast, that it took him aback. And he looked at me. He said, did you anticipate that we were going to ask you that question? And I thought to myself, though I didn't say it, what, are you accusing me of being a cheat or a liar? Right? You just said it's a random question off a set of questions nobody's seen. How could I possibly anticipate you were going to ask me that question out of all that material? I said, no, I didn't know you were going to ask me that question. The reason I was able to do it is because I knew it that well. That's what it gives you to be able to process information over and over. And when you get to this point, believe me, I was cramming the day and night before that licensure examination. Everything I'd done up to that point wrote on it. But I still had a job. I still had kids. When are you going to do this? Get a calendar. Get a calendar and start using it. Before we had Outlook and software like that, I actually carried around a little calendar in my breast pocket, and I would take it out and write down things, and then you have to consult it. You can write down stuff in your calendar all day long, but if you don't look at your calendar, it isn't going to do you any good. So put it somewhere or make a habit that you're going to look at it regularly. Always read your syllabus for each class and note when tests and projects are coming up, and be aware of that ahead of time so that you're prepared for it. Right? So you're able to plan ahead for the time you need to make happen the studying you need to do or the work you need to do. The syllabus is a contract between you and your instructor. Your instructor is not supposed to deviate wildly from that syllabus without notifying you, and ideally at least getting the majority consent of the class. And if they do deviate wildly from it and your grade is adversely affected, you could do a grade appeal. And guess what your big evidence would be? The syllabus. But if you haven't even read it, you don't know that it's been violated. But if you do read it, it oftentimes will tell you when projected dates of tests are. So it helps you plug into your own life the variables. When do I need to be doing what? Make every class your top priority. No reason to miss a class unless you are deathly ill or some emergency arose, and drinking too much last night is not an emergency. I was a drunk and a pothead. And I don't do that anymore, so I can admit it openly and freely because I think it's helpful to people. You go to school, I'd worked out a lot of the partying and wildness, but I still was a drunk. I was an alcoholic. I drank heavily the first year and a half of community college and still made straight A's and still did my job, and nobody wanted me not to do it because I was very responsible about it. I showed up to every class. I didn't drink and drive anymore at that point. I quit that when I was 18. I just came. Always came. I may not have smelled all that great, but I was there. And I took that to be an obligation. You pay $1,000 a class to go to classes here at ETSU. By God, go to them. Get that information they have for you. Make yourself do it. It's a discipline thing, a self-discipline thing. And if you go and do it, it's easier to do well on the test. It really is. And I had the event of ride along with somebody who got picked up, and that was good. They got a designated driver. They called up this person, said, I need you to pick me up. I've been drinking. I don't want to drive home, and et cetera, et cetera. And the person's like, you want to go along? I said, sure, that's cool. I'll ride along. We went to get him. He probably could have found another way to get home. He only lived a couple miles from where he was. In my world, I'd have walked, right? But okay, doing the right thing on a weeknight, bothering this person. Thursday night, I think it was. That's the party night, isn't it? I think. I never did that because I partied before I went to college. And when I partied at home, I didn't go out, right? And here it was about midnight, Thursday night. This young lady asked this buddy in the back seat, you going to class tomorrow? And he's like, man, I don't know. She's like, wow, what time is it class? He's like, oh man, it's like 1 o'clock. And I'm thinking, seriously, dude? What kind of lightweight shit is that? Seriously? It's midnight. You can drink for 7 more hours. Crash at 7 a.m., sleep for 5, get up, drink some water, take some aspirin, shower yourself off, and be at class. But that's just not where he was at. I respect that. That's not where he was at. I was older. So that's the thing, is like you got this choice between this pain over here of doing this school thing, or so it seems. I see it as a blessing. If it's a blessing and not a curse, you don't go, I have to go to class. You say, I get to go to class. I can make the choice today to go or not go, but the better choice is to go. But if you're just now getting into your own self and your own independence, then it is a distraction and it is a temptation, and I understand that. I was a little bit older and worked some of that stuff out before I went. If I'd gone straight into college right out of high school, I couldn't have done it because I almost didn't graduate high school. I would have gone into community college, and like that young man, I would have been drinking and partying and probably would have been missing classes, and I would have flunked straight out. But if you go on that route, check yourself. I'm not saying he was doing poorly. I'm just saying if you find out you're doing poorly because you've got competing demands, quit school. Which people say, no, professors never say quit school. I've had a lot of people say, thank you. You're the only person who ever said that. I really didn't have it in here. I just went because I heard over all my life, go to school, go to college, go to college, go to college, got to get a good job, go to college. So they went to college, but it wasn't here, and everything else distracted them from what they needed to do well. And because they heard it from me, I suppose, at least the ones that came back and said, I quit. I walked away from it. And then I came back when I'm ready. and now I'm knocking it out. So they didn't trash their GPA. My own daughter did that. Second semester, she withdrew from college. I said, go on, baby, that's awesome, right? Because she took W's instead of F's. She didn't trash her GPA. She went out the proper way. She withdrew from all of school. She got married. She got a job. She got an apartment. She worked a job she didn't like all that much until it wasn't go to college, go to college. It's like, oh, I could go to college and do something else. And by the time she went back, she made nothing but A's and B's, right? Conveying now an opportunity to go to grad school, which she's looking at doing. So you see what I'm saying is you got to look ahead, but it's hard to do that. Pre-test. All that is pre-test. But now I'm talking about right before the test. I'm talking about immediately and hours leading up to the test. Show up on time and prepared. If you've been on your syllabus and you got your calendar, of course, you're not going to be that person who's like, oh, dude, we got a test today? Oh, that's bad, right? You're going to know when the tests are. You're going to show up. You're going to be prepared. You're going to be on time. For me, I'm going to find a little place where I can sit and run through all my notes again. Evelyn Wood style, right? Now I'm just skimming them again because they're already in there. Just refreshing myself right before I need to regurgitate that information. I'm going to go find me a little nook out there. It would have been in a little lobby out here in one of these doors. And I'm just going to sit down and read as much as I can in whatever amount of time I have. Over and over and over until it's time to go to the test. When I walk in the test, I'm avoiding talking to people. I'm a friendly person. I like people. I'll help them out. They got questions. Before the test, I'll be happy to talk to anybody about anything. But when we get to the test, the last thing I need to hear is a bunch of people chattering about what they don't know about on the test. That's just going to confuse me. Somebody go, man, what's cognitive dissonance? Oh, I think it's this. No, dude, it's not that. It's this. It's this. No. La, 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 la. Right? You know, I used to put my elbows on the table and sit in my seat looking like I had my head in my hands. And really what I was doing was pushing up on the bottom of my earlobes to drown that out. I'm ready. I'm ready to deliver the material. Let's get on with the test. So they'll confuse you. Now you want to get comfortable. That's what the test anxiety seminar was about. Deep breathing. If you're anxious, you shouldn't be. But you can't tell people not to be anxious, right? The forebrain knows that they know what they need to know because they've done all the study and they got it. They could answer the questions if it wasn't a test. If only it wasn't a test, I could tell you what I know. But unfortunately, this is the time we need you to tell us what you know. So calm yourself down. Don't even start until you're perfectly calm. Deep breathing, belly breathing. You can hide it. You can make it look like you're not doing that. Deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation until you are calm. Your fight or flight response is cooled out. Your heart's not fluttering anymore. Now start the test, right? That's what you want to do. Manage your physiology so that you can use your psychology and deliver all that content you've been working so hard to know. You know what you know, so be confident, cool out, and deliver the material. During the test, don't pay attention to anybody else. They only distract you and people might think you're cheating. I don't even look at anybody else during a test. All right? Just focus on the test. Staying calm. Immediately, if you can use scratch paper or if you can write on a hard copy, do it. Drop everything you can think that you know. Quadratic equation. How many people know that cold right now? Raise your hand. What is it?
Opposite of B, like it's too long.
Okay, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Anybody else know it? It's not a bad thing. That's say it out loud.
Negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all that over 2A.
Is that right? Yeah. So you knew it when you heard it, right? And that's what I'm saying. Now, why would you try to remember that in your head while you're answering questions? If I can, I'm dropping that down. That's the first thing I'm going to do is write the equation itself. Now all I got to do is what? Plug and chug, right? Now I've got the formulas right here. All I got to do is figure out the problems. If we're talking about personality trait theory, and you know that's on your test, and you know that the mnemonic you've devised, mnemonic's just a device to remember things. Ocean or canoe, ocean. You just write ocean. Then as soon as you get to the big 5 question, you're looking at the one that has openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism in it. You got all that right there. You don't have to try and remember it. You don't have to worry about it. You're going to remember it. You just dump it. It's helpful. If it's a multiple choice test, cover up the answers and read the stem. And before you look at the answers, try to answer the question in your head. Because you know the material. Reading the question, you ought to have a pretty good idea what the answer should be. Then go one by one. A, is that it? Nah. Mark it out. B, that's pretty close. That might be it. Don't jump on it. Maybe. Question mark. C, D, oh, that's kind of close, but now I'm looking at the differences between two. And at the very worst, I've dropped it to 50-50 instead of 1 out of 4. Improved my odds dramatically of getting it right, right? But also, now I'm thinking through two things instead of just kind of going for the first one that looked right. And I worked with a woman up in Appalachian State University, and she came to me after the test, and she said, I know this information, but I got like a 70-something. And I asked her some of the questions, and she knew it. She could answer them cold. So she knew her information. And I told her to do this. I said, cover up the answers, read the stem, and then go through one by one by one by one. She started getting 97s, 98s. Why? Because she was probably jumping to the first one that looked right. And you don't have to leave the test. You don't have to be the first one out. Right? So if you get to one you're not sure about, put a question mark beside it, skip the bubble sheet, make sure you know you skipped it, and if you fill in the bubbles wrong, nobody can help you, right? But use the time. If you've got an hour and it took you 20 minutes to do it, now you've got 30 minutes to double check your work. I wouldn't change my answers unless I had a compelling reason to do so, because there's no evidence to support changing answers. I would go with whatever I thought it was at first after having evaluated them. Unless I had reason to, and you know as well as I do in multiple choice questions, sometimes you get to a question and it answers a previous question. Right? You know the answer to this is A. Well, if that's A, then back here I just need to go back and that must be C. You know that because you know the material well enough that it prompted your memory. Well, in an essay test, that's all you're doing. It's a recall test. They give you some minimal prompt. Right? Compare and contrast the reasons for the start of the American versus the French Revolution. There's all kinds of stuff in there. So if you just get freaked out by the question, it's going to be hard to do. But if you just start dropping information on it in a bulleted format, as much as you can remember, all the little things you can remember about it, that will help you. In fact, what you should do with the essay test is not go for the hardest question first, not go for the easiest question first. See how many questions you got and how long you got. If I got 4 items and 1 hour to do it, that's 15 minutes per question. I'm going to spend 2 minutes going through and dropping down everything I can think about. Then the next one, then the next one. Now I have 13 minutes per test item. But I now have a guide and a thing that's going to cue my memory even more. Right? Because seeing what I wrote down is going to make me think of something else. And it serves as kind of an outline to help you organize your responses. And if you wind up spending a little bit more time than you planned, so instead of 13 minutes, I went ahead and spent 16 minutes, well, now I've got 12 minutes left for the last 3 questions, you know. So just be watching the clock, but be delivering the information. We're moving up to the end of the slide for this presentation and the end of our time. After the test, if you've got a cumulative final, you don't need to freak out. If you've been doing this, then what you do is if you do the first test, you start doing the same thing for the second test. But in the interim, just go back and review test 1 again. Every couple weeks, just reread the test 1 stuff. Then test 3 comes, focus on test 3. But go back and just reread test 1 and test 2 again. Test 4, same thing. When test 5 or whatever comes along and it's the cumulative final, you're not freaking out. Why people freak out? Because most of them never looked at test 1 material until the final exam, and they essentially have to relearn all of it again. If you've been looking at it periodically, then you're just reviewing, which is what you've been doing the whole time, and you've got it, and you're comfortable, and there's no need to freak out. But if it's not a cumulative final, you know what you do with that material after the exam? Forget it. You don't need it anymore. What do you need it for? Think about all the hours you spent in high school, junior high school, elementary school, preschool. How much do you remember of it? Right? And when you get done with your bachelor's degree, it's going to be the same way. Right? You're going to get out and you're going to remember very little of it. What you're going to remember is what you've specialized in. That's what the knowledge base is. I know more about psychology not because I'm brighter than anybody, but I've been studying psychology since 1994. Again and again and again and again and again. Repetition works, repetition works, repetition works. If I don't know more than everybody else by now, something's wrong with me. Right? That's why I go to mechanics. Because they know more about little things. Like they know more about less. I know more about one field. They know more about one field. I go because they have expertise on cars. Somebody else comes to me because I have expertise on psychology. Somebody else goes to somebody else because they have expertise in accounting. Right? They do it more and more and more. When I left that oral exam, I don't remember what those questions were, and I don't need to, because A, I operate ethically, and I know the general laws and the general principles, and if I get into an esoteric situation, I know where to look it up. Tennessee Code annotated on the web. And because I've had this process, I know how to find information. College teaches you to find information quickly and comprehensively and evaluate it critically to figure out what's important and what is not, and that is a value add to your employer or to you if you are an employer. 9 out of 10 small businesses fail, not because they're not passionate, but because running a business is complicated, right? There are all kinds of things you really need to know about to be successful. And unless you actually availed yourself of all that knowledge, much of which is free and on the internet, but you'd have to know what's good and what's not good, and hired people to compensate for your weaknesses, you're going to be at a disadvantage. But if you know what you need to know and go, well, I'll start a business, well, I better go take some business classes or at least read some business books. I need to find what's good information. I need to highlight that. I need to use it. You're going to be a critical thinker. This is what it teaches you. You don't walk out with a bachelor's degree and people go, man, you got a bachelor's degree? What'd you learn in college? They say, oh, you're hired because you have a higher qualification, not because you're a better person. Here's the policy and procedure manual for the company. Read it, learn it, do it. But if you're a critical thinker, you're going to be a value add because when problems come up, you're going to see them differently. You're going to seek out information to understand them more quickly. You're going to systematically recommend interventions and know how to evaluate them. And that makes you more valuable, not because you're a better human being, but because you're applying the skills you learn in college to the knowledge base. And that is all we have for How to Study today. So thank you.